you ready to go yourself? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Town of Nantucket Finance Committee meeting for November 13th. This meeting is called to order. Is there any public comment on any items that are not on our agenda for today? Hearing none, we'll move to item number 3, review of minutes for September 11th meeting. Should we have received those in the past? That's okay.
Motion to approve?
Okay, before I'll take that motion in a second. Any questions on the minute before I take a motion to approve? There is a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, well, discussion on the motion, on the minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Item 4, committee reports. Does anybody have anything to talk about today on committee reports? John?
Yeah, the Capital Program Committee, I don't have anything to report except the fact that we're looking at a capital expenditure program.
It's on.
You can't
Oh,
have
good,
it.
all right.
We're looking at this point, we're looking at a capital request for around $71,500,000 for the 2016, but that, there's a lot of work that has to be done around when is going to get done, what is going to be done when, and so forth. So we're right in the middle of it. That's I think is going to be the hardest part. In looking at so far, looking at the various capital requests, they all have merit to a lesser or greater degree. So working out priorities is going to be difficult, but I think I think we've got a good group, and I think we're moving along on it. So a lot of money to be spent and a lot of it has to do with the fact that we haven't been spending it in the last few years. So we're playing some catch-up ball.
All right, thank you. Any other committee reports? All right, the audit committee will be meeting a week from Tuesday, I believe the 26th, for an update on the current audit. And other than that, I don't have anything else. It was an interesting discussion at the Board of Selectmen meeting last night on the CWMP. I hope you all had a chance to watch that. I think that's something that we as committee members should pay attention to, because I think that coming around the corner, we will be dealing with it. Okay. Any other thing on committee reports? All right. Moving to item number 5, it's a reserve fund transfer request for DPW equipment, and I believe you all have a copy in front of you that was given to us today. Mm-hmm. And is Carrie here?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, sorry, Carrie, I didn't see it. Welcome.
Thank you.
And just get a little description would be great for us.
I'm here before you this evening to ask for a reserve fund transfer of $55,000. We have a 1994 backhoe that has quite a few hours on it, at least 15,000, way over 100,000 miles in car years. We have used that as a secondary piece of equipment. We use it basically on a daily basis. It is our second line of defense after our loader, and the backhoe recently was taken out, and the hydraulic pump blew the engine cover off, damaging the engine, the pump, and the repairs are quite expensive and exceed the value of the piece of machinery. It isn't something that we can do without, and we had not budgeted for it to be replaced this fiscal year. So I'm asking for the $55,000 so that we can go out to bid for another piece of equipment, another backhoe that will allow us to have that functionality.
Okay, very good. We entertain some questions from the committee?
Absolutely.
Anybody have any questions? Correct.
What's the trade-in on the old one?
Well, what we will do is put out to bid for another backhoe, and we will list this one as a trade-in. So the individuals bidding will take a look and factor that into the cost. So I would assume that we would get between $5,000 and $10,000 for it.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Matt,
Oh, just, yeah.
does it, the way this works, you're requesting a $55,000 transfer from reserve. You may or may not get a trade-in value. Does that mean that the town just transfers the net, or, you know, let's say there's $10,000 left over after you get the trade-in? Does that just sort of stay with the DPW budget? I don't understand
It
how that
goes
works.
into the operating budget, and at the end of the fiscal year, the operating budget closes, so any remainder would close to free cash.
Okay.
Or the only amount that was transferred out of reserve fund.
Is the amount.
Well, that's sort of what I was getting at, Libby. I didn't understand whether you transferred 55 or you transferred the, sort of what you end up needing net of the trade-in.
I think we,
The maximum amount could be the 50.
we just transfer in when we know that.
Well, what we could do is just put it up to amount of 55,000, and anything left over will go back into the reserve fund, or if it's past the end of the fiscal year, will go into the general fund. Does that sound all right to you? That's a good question. Cliff?
I know for the police vehicles and everything else, we seem to have a schedule. I don't remember seeing the schedule for the DPW. Do we have all our, are we starting to do that with all our trucks and all our
We're
equipment? so we
actually
don't?
just starting that now. The age of a lot of the vehicles is quite old, so we are having to go beyond what perhaps is the useful life of the vehicle. Backhoes don't typically, in daily use, last 20 years without a lot of tender love and care. So it definitely is well over that.
Jim?
Have you looked at your other budgeted expenditures to see if there's something you could substitute?
Use something else. Yeah, our budget is such at this point that we didn't have an additional 55,000. I did want to introduce our mechanic, Germano Chadi.
Oh, great,
and,
sure. Yeah.
he is the one who's been giving the TLC to all the vehicles.
Yeah, I like him there. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. We need it, right? We need the machine, right? Thank you. Stephen? Oh, wait, almost. Just a second, Jim. Stephen?
Kara, given that you said that 20 years is usually longer than you get out of the backhoe, why wasn't this forecast as an expenditure?
It actually was. We had put it into Chapter 90 for this year, but it had been on the capital projects moving towards this replacement point. So if we hadn't put it into Chapter 90, it would probably have been, I believe it was 16 when it was coming due.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Further questions? Okay. What's the disposition of the...
Motion to approve?
A motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, and the motion to approve will be the amount up to $55,000. Is that your motion?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, very good. Oh, you're welcome, thank you. Let's see here, next item, which is a review of the police contract settlement. And Greg, you want to, thank you. Move the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
In your packet, I believe you have a summary of the tentative agreement between the superior officers as well as the patrol officers. Those are two separate contracts. Amanda Johnson from our HR department put together a spreadsheet summary of the actual proposals and then a summary in layman terms of the tentative agreements. To give you a little background, our town negotiations team consists of myself, town council, who happens to be here today for other matters, but David Jenkins, who's behind me.
I think I was going to do this later, but yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you.
Yeah.
As well as relevant members from the specific departments, so in this particular case, Chief Pittman. And we actually do throw in a couple of other employee department heads where relevant. So on other negotiations, we may have other members of town staff who are not in those departments. So in front of you, you do have, let's start with superior officers. A little bit of background on it. We met with superior officers on 4 different occasions. We were at an impasse, and this contract did go to mediation through the state. So what you have before you is an agreement that has been mediated. In summary, you have it in front of you, it is a 3-year contract that would begin this past July 1st and extend into fiscal year 2017. It is a COLA, a cost of living adjustment, annually at 2.0%. And the other relevant items or tentative agreements that were negotiated pertain mostly to language changes to help facilitate the management of the department better. There was one change regarding the hourly rate for, I'm going to get it wrong, I think, for the evening shifts. And if I'm getting that wrong, you can note that is incorrect, right? There was no change to that. Okay. I'm sorry. I take that back. I read, as I was briefing myself, item number 3 incorrectly. There was a language change. The cost of that contract over the term of the 3 years, including health insurance, correct, Martin, is 2.54% over the 3 years. Similarly, for the patrol officers, there were multiple proposals that were put on the table. We did come to an impasse where we also went through mediation with the state for this contract. Similarly, it came out as a 3-year contract, retro to this past July 1st, with a COLA of 2.0% annually for the 3 years of the contract, and similar language changes. The cost of that contract over the 3 years is 2.43%. That's just in summary. I don't know what else you'd like to know about the contracts. The contracts are not yet ratified. They were approved by the board, the selectmen in executive session. They've come to you. The next process would be, should it be approved through this board, will be brought to the Board of Selectmen in open session. Should it be approved in open session, it goes to town meeting for funding.
Okay. Very good, thank you. Questions, John?
Yeah, when you say that it costs 2.3% or whatever, how do you figure that?
In your packet is a cost of contract.
Yeah, I see that. I'm looking right at it.
And that is how we achieve that number. All those different items are factored out based on an assumption that the employees remain the same, that there's no attrition, that promotions, for example, if somebody's going to be promoted or move up in a step that during the life of the contract, and then any other cost of the contract, such as uniform allowance, whatever, is included into that analysis.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand it, because what we've got here is you've got an increase over those years. Then you've got below it, there's another set of numbers which says the cost of contract over 3 years is $244,621. I'm talking about the patrol contract. I'm just trying to understand so I know what I'm reading. I don't understand the difference. You've got two numbers there. You're using a 2.43 cost of contract at $120,000. What is this 244,621?
Well, those would be the actual dollar figures for the contract over the term of the contract.
Yeah.
And the percentage, and I may defer to Martin, who helps put together the actual contract, cost of contract, to determine how it gets to that percentage number.
Well, what I think you're saying is that 244,621 is if you take the cost of the contract today and the cost of the contract in 3 years, the difference is that.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
And
that is the
usually when
growth of
you
the
figure out
contract.
percentage, then you take the difference, you divide it by the original cost of the contract.
Yes.
That comes out to 13% from where I come from.
I may have Martin come up and if you can help explain the cost of the contract, or our finance director.
Good evening. The 244,621 we did after talking with Brian. These are increases. The way we're calculating them, if you take the 120 to 639, this is just year-to-year differences. While the bottom part that gives you the total cost of the contract, we take the difference of the first year, which is 42,656, and we carry it through the 3 years. Because once you get that increase, it stays throughout the 3 years. Then the second year difference with the first year is 38,670. And we carry that one twice because it occurs in the second year, but it carries into the third year as well. And then the third difference gives us an updated number. So you're looking at two different numbers. The 126.39 is just year to year, from 14 to 15, 15 to 16, 16 to 17. But if you carry the costs for the first year increase and the second year into the last year of the contract, for the whole length, yes, that is the true cost of the contract.
The true cost of the contract then is 13.3% by my measure.
I don't know how you arrive at 13.3. The 243 that you're looking at.
244,621 by the value of the contract to start with, which is, I believe it says here, yeah, yeah,
All right.
yes.
So the 243, I can explain that, and that number is the average of the 3% increases that you're looking at and you're in between those years.
But that's
So it's just an
irrelevant,
average.
Martin. I mean, what we really want to know is that over a 3-year period, what's the percentage increase of the contract?
Okay. You have the dollar one. I can calculate the.
Yeah, financial impact. It's going to cost us, in my view, 13% more to run that group, that department at the end of 3 years than it was at the beginning.
How do you arrive at that number? What are you, I seem to be confused by the mathematics of the calculation.
This is not a good time to go over it. I just don't understand. I thought I'd get a quick
Okay.
understanding.
How about, let's do this. Let's go back to the percentages that you have listed here, the 2.3, 2.9. Why don't you go over again how those will arrive on that?
Those are simply year-to-year increases.
Year-to-year increases,
Yeah.
and so basically dividing what into what? It might help, John. What numbers did you use to
Well,
get that?
to get the 264, the 42,656 is the dollar increase that
Okay.
divides into the amount to start with the 1616215. So
Mhm.
that's how we get, and then it carries through year after year.
Okay.
And the 243 is an average of those 3 percentages. That's all there is.
That's all that is?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, before I go on, remember, does that help you?
No,
It does not help, no.
That's not a number that I could care about. I could care less about that number.
All right. We'll take a break on it. David?
I actually come up with the same numbers that John comes up with. In the total contract in year 3, $1,578,172 is about a 12.6% increase over budget 14 of 1401319. The 2%, 2+% increases look like those are only salary increases. But we're running,
Yeah, they don't
obviously
include-
insurances that are higher and things like that.
Insurance is mentioned below, is growing by 12%. So if you read in the notes, it is mentioned there how insurance is growing. So
So it's
It all costs money, doesn't
So the salary piece of it, and I didn't look to see all that was in your salary, whether it included all the statutory benefits requirements, but
in calculating the cost of contract, the medical insurances are not included. Does this answer this question? I mean,
the thing I always look at when I look at any contract or anything is the financial impact. If it's a 3-year contract, what's the financial impact for the town over 3 years? And that's what David and I are talking about, financial impact. You go to what the cost of the contract is in year 1, and you divide that into the differential over 3 years, and then you come up with a percentage.
That's how you wanted to do it from now on, you run all the numbers.
yeah, I can send you this tomorrow. I mean, we can rewrite the spreadsheet.
I can't speak for the whole, from my perspective, I've never and I've dealt with contracts for 40 years, and I've never dealt with it any other way. Look at total financial impact.
I can add these numbers. I can read.
Okay, well, why don't we do this? I have a suggestion if I can. We have some time.
Okay.
Why don't we'll put this on the agenda for our next meeting for this contract, and try to, just a second, and try to come up with a consensus so that this committee is comfortable with what it's voting on.
Okay.
How about that? Jim?
I don't know if John, I'd ask John, but I'm at the same, that's just a different way to present it.
Mhm.
You know, if we-
It could be, that's all it is, but that's what we'll look into.
I think we can still discuss the merits of it.
That's fine. We don't end the discussion, this is before we take a motion, maybe, to vote on it, just make sure that we're all
We need that
comfortable.
information to take a motion for us.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Because we got the calculation, and we know it's the cost of the financial impact is X, and we know it includes things that are traditionally out of the bargaining session
Mhm.
process, which is
If this committee is comfortable to go ahead, that's fine with me. I just want to be sure that we don't feel that we're under any pressure, because we still have some time to vote on it. But that being said, we can certainly continue the discussion.
Well,
John?
yeah, I disagree with Jim, and I think that whether it's part of the bargaining or not, it's a cost of doing business, and that's what we want to look at. And the only reason it's not in the bargaining is because they choose not to bring that into the bargaining. Period.
Mr. Chair, may I make a recommendation?
Yes.
Because this is the same form we've been using, at least since I've been here.
Right.
And including at this body.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we get direction of what you're looking for, so we're not trying to hash it out even at the next meeting?
I would agree.
Because we can cut and dice numbers all the way, any different way. We just need to know what you're looking for.
Okay.
And then if you want to continue with discussion of the contracts today, that's great. It's up to you, however you want to handle it.
Okay. However, I would want to handle it is that, looking at the numbers, it certainly seems in line with the other contracts that have been negotiated the way it's presented. But that being said, is that I would want the committee as a whole, the consensus to move ahead or not. And if we're not ready today, certainly then, between now and the next time we meet, is to get a consensus so that the members understand what they're voting for and what the numbers mean. So, David?
Yeah, through to Greg, and just some information. If the medical insurance, health insurance numbers don't increase or increase more than what you've projected, let's say they don't increase as much, what carries through into the budget? Does the budget get adjusted up or down? So let's say you come in, I think in fiscal year 15, 16, and 17, you assume 12%. Let's say it comes in at 6%.
Correct.
Does the budget get reduced down to reflect that, or does it stay at your
Yes.
12%, and then the money gets used for something else?
This is just a projection. So when we're actually budgeting year to year, if health insurance has increased or decreased, we would budget down or budget up based on that year. This is to try to give us an idea of the overall cost would be. And if this gets blown way out, what if it all goes up 20%? We have to budget that as we're budgeting annually. Like we're doing that right now for fiscal 16.
But I think where John, not to put words in John's mouth, but where I think he's coming from is that the total cost of this contract or any other contract includes health insurance.
Mhm.
It is very expensive. It has been moderating in its increases, but nevertheless going up faster than the cost of living has gone up. And it just becomes something that, it's a big number and we just automatically assume it.
It's a
And
big
at
number.
some point, I think, have some discussion ought to be made as to the fact that this is a whole package, we're not just talking about salaries here, that we're talking about
Benefits.
all the other benefits that go along with being employed.
Okay. Jim?
Matt?
Oh, Jim, and then I'll go
I'm
to you.
a little confused. I thought we were just voting on the contract, not the entire financial package. I think we're voting on that.
I believe we are voting on the contract. That's correct. That's my understanding, too.
I thought we were just doing it on the wages, but maybe I need some clarification, I guess.
I'm with you on that, but we'll hold on. Do you have a question, Rita?
Yeah,
Joe,
I had a question on the supporting materials in a contract. Did I read it correctly that one of the agreed-to terms was that the co-pay by the sharing of the medical premiums went from 90-10 to 80-20?
That's a good point. Let me bring that up. During negotiations, one of our goals was to decrease the contribution cost of health insurance for the PPO from 90-10 to 80-20 and eliminate master medical. By Massachusetts state law, every union within a municipality has to agree to those same terms before it is affected. The police, and I'll point out that the superior officers did agree to do that. However, what we put into the contract is language that says when that happens, we will reopen the contract to make it happen. So by them accepting to do that or agreeing to a tentative agreement doesn't mean they've changed their health insurance contribution. Every union has to agree to it at the same time.
Every union, including the police union?
Yeah, absolutely.
So all of them have to agree to that
Including
change?
teachers also.
Okay.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Any other questions we have? Yeah. Okay.
I was just trying to get straight. I know the Quinn bill was an argument among the parties, and what that means percentage-wise as far as it says replacing the lost Quinn bill and making parity.
That was one of the proposals by the union. However, that was not negotiated into the contract.
Okay.
So here we are. We do have numbers. Going back to the point Jim made, I think that, and I would look for Martin or for anyone for guidance, is that you're looking for an approval is on the wage contract, the wages contract. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Jim, back to your point, is that you are correct, and that's my understanding too. But here we are. Like I said, we certainly don't have to feel any pressure on voting for anything today. If yep.
What Jim says is...
Get closer to the mic, please.
What Jim says is very obvious to anybody who read the thing. Don't need a lecture on that. But the issue is you cannot look at any one piece of any departmental situation without looking at the total. And all I'm suggesting is I'd like to make sure we all understand what the total is. And I just threw out a number because I grabbed some numbers and did some calculations. I'd like to have it verified before I go vote on something like that. And Jim, I don't know how in the world you can look at isolate just salaries and just say, let's vote on just salaries because that's just what the contract's about without looking at the total impact. Just don't understand it.
All right, we'll cut down the editorializing. Why don't we do this? I don't think I'm ready to take a motion. We'll have some discussions and we'll bring this back.
And was for SEIU also?
Probably.
Okay.
I would think that's safe. I think we can talk a little bit about it just to make sure that the parameters are set. I think we know
Perhaps
here.
through you, Mr. Chair, we
Yes.
could work with our finance director to find out maybe what the body would prefer to see before them in order to make an informed decision.
I think, yes, I would agree with that. My first impression, and could be changed, is we're looking for more of a holistic approach to the numbers to see, throwing in addition to the wages, the other benefits there to see what the effect would be. Is that a fair way of putting that, John? Am I summing that up for you?
Financial effective.
For the whole
For the
picture?
whole country.
Okay. I think that, I think, and unless anyone has any different on that, I think that's what we're looking for.
Okay.
And then we have that quantified and then bring it back and discuss it, and we'll go from there. Fair enough? Okay. Okay. Yes, it can. All right, then moving on with SEIU, we can certainly hold that for the same thing. Does anyone have any comments on that, or and that includes from the audience? Martin, I'm not sure if you or Libby want to talk about that. SEIU.
Well, apparently you want the same information.
I just want to be, I'm just giving you an opportunity. We'll do it next time.
You want completely different cost analysis sheet, but it's simple enough according to
Simple
finance
enough.
director to prepare, so we will. And just a quick react, please don't think that the Board of Selectmen and Town Administration doesn't discuss the entire cost and asset.
We don't?
Impossible, because every executive session it has to do with collective bargaining. But the health insurance is a much bigger picture
Yes,
than
it is.
individual contracts.
Yes, it is. And speaking for this committee, I don't think anyone would operate in just the numbers of the wages. I think that is all understood. It's just more of getting an idea what the actual numbers are for us. That's a request. I agree. That's the first, I wasn't aware either. But moving ahead, we'll get it right and get the numbers going. Okay, very good. Oh, and I see, no, I think let's hold off until they get the numbers. Okay, we're spinning our wheels. Yeah, let's move on. Moving on to the next item, which is actually number 8, discussion of employee contract negotiations and pensions plans. And there was a discussion at last week's Board of Selectmen meeting, and this is, I'm going to, even though I couldn't get into the meeting because it was so crowded, I'm assuming this is kind of along the same line. I would like to introduce from Town Council, Mr. David Jenkins, who specializes in labor. Thank you, relations. But at this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Craig Sperry, who would like to discuss what is a part of our packet, and I'll leave that to him to explain that, because I don't want to get it wrong. But Craig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the packet is a description of, it's called COIN, Civic Openness in Negotiations, and it relates directly to labor negotiations between the town and with the various labor contracts for the town employees. And if you've had a chance to read it, I'm not going to go through the whole thing in depth because there's quite a bit there, but in a nutshell, what it says is that because the cost of labor contracts make up more than 80% of the general fund budget, that's the largest expense in the town's budget. And traditionally, negotiations have been done with the town manager and the assistant town manager as our chief negotiators, assisted by our labor counsel from Copeland Page. What this ordinance asks for is to have the Board of Selectmen essentially take over overseeing the negotiations and have outside labor negotiators negotiate with the various labor contracts, as opposed to how it is now, because the way I view it is with our town manager and assistant town manager as our chief negotiators, there's an inherent conflict of interest. They benefit by the negotiations. So to me, it doesn't seem like the town is getting the most effectiveness in our negotiations that would be possible. If we had outside labor negotiators, they can go head to head with the employee negotiators who are seasoned professionals. And I think we've seen over the years the effect of that, where the state average of, just to take an example of the health care, I think the numbers came out in a Board of Selectmen meeting a few meetings ago, 3 or 4 meetings ago, that the average is a 66-34 payout, where here we came up just before. We have a 90-10 health insurance payout, and now it's an 80-20 payout, where the average for the state is 66-34. So I think if we had this ordinance in effect, we'd see a little more even playing field in labor negotiating in when we negotiate contracts. There's contained within this ordinance is a step-by-step process of how this would take effect, and it's not just the idea of hiring the outside negotiators to represent the town, but there would be a lot more openness as the negotiations go along. So the public would be informed. Of course, there are things that have to be kept private, behind closed doors, but once steps are taken that information can be made public, that is done. If, for example, if things are decided not to be part of the contract anymore, those are disclosed, and that it's also brought to the Board of Selectmen. Let's see, it would be allow the public to review and comment on proposed employee contracts during at least 2 Board of Selectmen meetings prior to the annual meeting vote. So that way, the public has the ability to view what is actually being voted on at town meeting. I think with us reviewing and approving, or with these police contracts and the SEIU contracts that we were just talking about before, those didn't come up at town meeting because we weren't done negotiating with them. So to me, I think the more sunshine and more light we bring to the contract process, it's better for the town. It brings a better fiscal health to the town in the end.
Thank you. I was going to say, are we ready to take some questions? I think
Sure.
Jim, start with you.
I probably should keep my mouth shut, but not really.
We can't hear you, sir.
All right. So I probably should keep my mouth shut. So that's what I was doing.
It's never stopped you before?
So, just without, I'm sure there's a lot of merit to this, and maybe it's, obviously any opportunity to improve is something we should take a look at. But I would argue, on the face of it, if wages are 80% of our general fund budget, then that's absolutely the most important thing for management and town manager and assistant town manager to work on. I think that's the best use of their time, and with the oversight of the Board of Selectmen. So I just don't. I also think this is my personal view. Is this is a fundamental role of management to do, and I also don't see how the town manager and assistant town manager accrue any personal, benefit to doing this. So I obviously it needs a lot more thought. And I'm certainly open to it, but those are some preliminary comments.
Further questions or comments from the committee before I open it up? Okay. Before opening the floor, Mr. Jenkins, would you like to comment on this right now before taking questions? Might illuminate us on state law?
Good evening, members of the committee. I hadn't met any of you other than Mr. Sperry last week, so thank you for having me here tonight. As the chairman said, my name is David Jenkins. I'm a partner at Copeland and Page, and I am your assigned labor person. None of you folks know me. We really haven't interacted much. I have been practicing labor and employment law since my graduation from law school in 1977. Had to think there for a second. For about 20 years, I represented unions. Please don't hold that against me. And for the last 16 years or so, I've been with Copeland and Page. I saw your eyebrows raised. As a matter of fact, of the people we hire, I generally insist that the lawyers have some experience representing labor unions, because I find that if you have that background, you can appreciate both sides of the problem. Mr. Sperry raises a lot of good points. Employment costs are about 80% of your budget, and employment costs are a significant part, probably the most significant part of the budgets that you folks act on. The way contracts are negotiated here presently is pretty much the way that they are negotiated across the state. We represent 120 communities statewide. I am responsible for labor relations in maybe 35 of those. Typically, the town bargaining team would consist of either the town manager / town administrator, an assistant if there is one, a department head, maybe an HR person, and sometimes labor counsel, sometimes not. So the model that you have here is the model that's generally used throughout the state. You'll see any significant difference. The selectmen, by statute under Chapter 150E, are designated as the bargaining agent for the townside employees. Obviously, the school committee is designated for school employees. And I can tell you my experience over the last period of time is that the selectmen keep careful watch on the town manager and the assistant town manager in terms of negotiation strategy. All proposals that are received from the union and all proposals that are given by the town side are vetted on multiple levels, including my level, HR, and for cost analysis. Mr. Sperry is somewhat right with respect to the health insurance, and I would say that health insurance is the major challenge that faces you folks, and we've been working pretty much full-time to try to get a resolution to that problem. It is unusual these days to see a 90-10 split on health insurance. Most communities faced this issue probably 10 or more years ago. Communities that resolved this problem before the financial crisis in 2008 were able to, had a tougher time in resolving that problem. Communities that resolved this problem 2008 through 2011 had an easier go of it. For whatever reason, and I make no judgment, this issue was not addressed in Nantucket. I have been learning it's a very complex issue. You're an island, you have one hospital, you have limited doctors, people are med-flighted out for situations that would not take place in the city where I live. So the problem of health insurance is very complex for you, but we are working very hard on it. The number that you cited, Mr. Sperry, was a little bit off. The state average on the split is about 78% by employers. And if you consult with Peter Savage, who's the town's health insurance consultant with Cook & Company, he would verify that figure. Doesn't mean you're doing great at 90-10, but it's not quite in the 60 range that you suggest. Now, the coin bylaw that was suggested, and Mr. Sperry shared this with me in advance, which I very much appreciate, and I know how strongly he feels on these issues and the pension issues, etc. The coin concept came out of California, and the coin concept resulted from municipalities engaging in bargaining for pension for employees. And I think, as we all read the newspapers, we know that California has a tremendous pension issue. And coin was developed in response to these pension negotiations, which gave very rich pensions to employees who, frankly, didn't work all that long. Now, the difference between California and Massachusetts is dramatic. Whereas in California, pensions are, as I understand it, negotiated locally. In Massachusetts, we have a statewide system. And the statewide system is set by Chapter 32. Chapter 32 is what they call permissive, in that it's not effective in the town until it's accepted. And that statute was accepted here in Nantucket in 1946. So the pension plan that you've had in effect has been here since 1946. And the rates for eligibility, the rates for what the annuities are, the rates for how you get a pension are standard across the state. Chapter 32 is also one of those statutes that we are prohibited from bargaining about. Chapter 150E is the state public employee bargaining statute. Section 7D of that statute sets out the statutes that we're allowed to negotiate about, and excluded from those statutes is Chapter 32, the retirement system. That's because there's a feeling on the state level that retirement should be standard across the state so that we don't run into the problem that California ran into, where local communities are negotiating different pension rates. Now, I haven't had a chance, to be honest, to go through the coin proposal line by line. So if I say something that is a little bit different than what you're talking about, I apologize. It's not an intent to mischaracterize it. Chapter 150E, Section 10A5, requires that the town and the union bargain together in good faith. Sounds like a pretty broad concept. The bargaining obligation in good faith has many, many subparts. And one of the subparts is that we are prohibited under Chapter 150E from making the kind of public disclosures that you would anticipate. So informing the public or the media of midterm bargaining status, or what proposals have been given and what was withdrawn from other proposals, and the general bargaining strategy, if you will, or bargaining history. We're prohibited by state law from disclosing that kind of information. The Public Employee Law, Chapter 150, was passed in 1974, and it is administered by what's called the Department of Labor Relations, or DLR. Cases in which unions accuse towns of unfair bargaining practice go to the DLR, where there's a decision, and those decisions could be appealed to the courts. One of the first cases that came out in the mid-'60s involved the town of Marion, and the town of Marion insisted that bargaining history be made public. The DLR ruled that that was a violation of the obligation to bargain in good faith, and the town of Marion appealed that to the appeals court. And if I could I just take a couple of minutes? I know
this
I'm
is actually fascinating.
sort of going on and rambling here, but here's what the appeals court said about the nature of negotiations and the need for confidentiality. Successful negotiations are based on compromise. They require that each side be free to test out a variety of proposals on the other, withdrawing some, giving up others in order to gain a better advantage in a different area. The presence of third parties necessarily inhibits such compromises and reduces the flexibility management and unions have to reach an agreement. Positions taken in public tend to harden, and battle lines are drawn in spite of the mutual desire of the parties to meet in an acceptable middle ground. The court went on and said, disclosure of the substance of negotiations after the parties have agreed not to disclose could not only violate the duty to bargain in good faith by breaching the ground rules, but could also interfere with the frank and open conduct of negotiations by creating a chilling effect on the negotiators. The decision was supported by studies that had been done at various universities, which showed the complexity that's imposed on negotiations when there is a requirement of public disclosure. Now, none of this is meant to say that the public is not entitled to know exactly what the cost of a contract is. At the end of the day, we're asking our citizens to sustain these contracts with their tax dollars, and the public has an absolute right to know at the end of the day what the cost components of a contract are. I spent 20 years as a union negotiator hiding those costs there. I came up with a lot of different stipends and a lot of different incentives, and money was tucked away in a contract, and it really wasn't readily visible, so that people could stand in front of a town meeting and say, yes, this is 2, 2, and 2 on the COLA, but we knew that the true cost was 3, 4, 5, because of items not including health insurance and pensions and stuff like that, but range qualifications fees and hazardous duty pay and any number of other things. So at the end of the day, the public's entitled to know, and I would say, having been involved in both, well, all of your negotiations, including the 2 police contracts that were before you tonight, the wage COLA is 2, 2, and 2. There are no other benefits. There's no hidden stipends, no hidden increases to night shift differential or anything along those lines. What you got was straight information, which I think the public has every right to. So, that's an overview. This is early in the process of considering how we all work together to try to help the community through these times, to try to figure out a way to apportion health costs in a fair way that is fair to the town and also fair to the employees. But having the newspaper involved in negotiations, I don't think at the end of the day would get us to that goal. So if there are questions, I'd be...
Well, thank you. That's certainly very helpful.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing this is that we are bound by state law on how we negotiate in good faith.
That's correct. State law in Chapter 150E would trump any bylaw that would be passed by the town.
Fair enough. Okay. Before I call on, do you want to respond? Yes.
Well, you said to have the newspaper involved in negotiations. I don't think that was my intent, and I wouldn't expect that to happen. Just to make that clear. I think the point should be made that it was the other way not that many years ago that the Board of Selectmen was sort of in charge of negotiations. And I wasn't here at the time, but was it 12 years ago, 10 years plus, that it changed to the present setup? So this is not something that has never been done before.
Not to put too fine a point on it, and again, if I misspeak, please forgive me. The selectmen have always been involved in the negotiations, and to this day, the selectmen are in charge of negotiations, so that even when, now, it's Greg and I who are at the table, Libby is not at the table. Greg and I are working under the direction and supervision of the Board of Selectmen. They are in charge of the negotiations, and there's not a thing that we do that they haven't approved of. So, and under state law, the selectmen are always in charge of negotiations. What you may be thinking of is that selectmen were previously at the table, which is, again, it may not sound like a big deal, but the selectmen are still in charge. They're just not there. And no reflection on any selectman or anybody. I think that the process that you have now with the selectmen controlling the way they are is generally considered to be the best way to do it.
I might beg to differ.
Right, well, sure.
And I think my fellow committee member, Mr. Kelly, said that he doesn't see the possibility or that it's appropriate. Well, in fact, the town manager and the assistant manager benefit by the negotiations when pensions are involved. They get a pension, so.
Yeah, that's not true, sir. Again, with respect, I don't want to speak for Libby. I don't think her wage increases have tracked what unions have gotten. The pension annuity that's paid to a particular employee is mathematically calculated. It's very complex, but generally years of service and age. And as I stand here, sir, I cannot imagine that there is any scenario where the town manager or the assistant town manager benefit in terms of their pensions as a result of the 2% increases that we're negotiating for these different groups. Now, in California, the situation was different, because in California, where COIN came from, town managers were negotiating a citywide pension plan that, as I understood it, they personally gained from. That's not the case here.
All right. Mr. DaCosta had a question first. You still want to go?
I want to make a statement, but I'll let you all.
You want to do that? Okay, because you had your hand up first. All right, John, go ahead. You're next.
Yeah, I don't want to put words. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure I heard. Now, one fine point you said was that when the judge was making that ruling, you said if the two parties agreed to bargain and keep bargaining confidential, and one of the parties makes it public, that's a problem.
That's right.
But what happens when they don't agree? There's no agreement for confidentiality. He doesn't deal with that in that judgment.
Yeah, if there's, and what happens, sir, is typically the first bargaining session, if you will, the town and the union negotiate is what's called ground rules. And these ground rules are pretty standard.
Yeah, I understand.
through this. You've probably seen them. You seem like a guy that's
Yeah.
been around. Typically, we'll say when we're going to have our meetings, how long the meetings are, and typically there'll be a ground rule that will say neither side will make a public statement while negotiations are pending.
But if they don't agree to that?
If they don't agree, the law would say that negotiations are private. If, in some unusual circumstance, if the town and the union agree to make public statements, then they would be free to make public statements.
They don't have to agree.
I would say that the status of the law now is if the union did not agree to that and a town made a public statement, that would be an unfair labor practice.
Okay. And I want to clarify that because that's
Sure.
the question, the basic question I have is, when I heard everything that you said, and I'm not familiar with Massachusetts state law.
Right.
All of my bargaining situation was in the private sector and not in Massachusetts.
Right.
What you're saying is by law, the taxpayers are really completely out of it.
No, I'm really saying just the opposite. Is what I'm saying is that there can't be public disclosure while the process is going on, but there has to be public disclosure once the process is
Once
complete.
it's done, sure, you got to tell them, here's what we did.
Right.
Well, of course.
Right.
But what you're saying is that they're not allowed to hear anything until it's all said and done. And then what do you do if they don't like it? There's nothing you can do about it.
I got to tell you,
across the country. Excuse me, let me finish.
I got
Across the country, not just in Massachusetts, across the country, the feeling of helplessness by many taxpayers because they don't feel like they have any control of the situation.
I'm one of those taxpayers, so I very much appreciate what you're saying. But I get to you cannot discount the power of town meeting, because I've been to many town meetings on both sides where the public has debated a particular contract and rejected a particular contract. I was aware of a situation in Holbrook, south of Braintree, up in the South Shore. The town meeting rejected a fire contract 3 times. So I think you and I agree. The public has a right to all this information. It's just a question of the timing.
John, I think the point's clear. I think it is, but it is. It's the law. And an example, town meeting has the final say. Let's don't forget what our mission is. We make recommendations to town. Hold on. I don't want to interrupt. And town meeting decides. There was an example back 6 years ago of an airport contract, and I don't know any of the members are on this committee. Jim, okay, thank you. Where the finance committee gave a negative recommendation when the town meeting was overturned. Town meeting has the final say. What we may take more responsibility is after the contract is negotiated, is that the numbers get public so that the attendees of town meeting have the ability to look at those numbers and decide for themselves. And I think that's the process. Is that correct, sir?
That's right, sir.
And so that we are dealing with, I think what we're talking about, I think we're spinning our wheels. The law is the law unless I'm misunderstanding something. So there.
That's the point I was making. The law, I was trying to understand, is that the law, and you were saying, well, no, it isn't. And then saying, well, we understand that at town meeting, it can be overridden.
Right.
That's like, but that makes it very difficult for the average taxpayer they have to go to the mat to have an influence on it. They have to go to an extreme to have an influence on negotiation. They have to do it after the fact.
My answer to that will be, we elect Board of Selectmen members. Board of Selectmen hires the negotiators.
Mm-hmm.
It's all part of the process. If we don't like it as taxpayers, we could speak at the ballot box. That's how the system is. Not to give a lecture in civic. Well, I am, because it's true. I think we get off the subject.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Maybe. Further comments? Okay. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I
Nice to
appreciate
meet
it.
you.
Questions from the audience? Is anyone? Bobby, Mr. DeCosta, please step to the mic.
Mr. Sperry, before I even start, I think you owe Libby and Greg an apology. To stand here and say that they have something to gain by these negotiations is ridiculous and absurd, and I would like you to make a public apology to them both right now. You probably won't, but I think you should. That being said, first of all, I'm going to assure you that they don't make any decisions in these negotiations without first coming to the Board of Selectmen, and the 5 of us vet them, and we tell them what to do, not them tell us what to do. That does not happen. Now, there are specific laws that govern how negotiations are done with contracts, with town employees or state employees. How many people in this board have negotiated union contracts? How many with public entities? There's a big difference. I found that out as soon as I got in office. Public entities, our business as a town, is to provide service to the taxpayers and the visitors of Nantucket. We don't make a profit. We're not in the profit business. We're in the service business. That's why 80% of our budget goes to labor. The selectmen who used to negotiate the contracts, and staff and our negotiating team, which I have full faith in, by the way, had nothing to do with it. It was done behind closed doors with a couple of selectmen members and the unions. And that's why we're at the point we're at right now, because they gave away the farm. There are other towns that I talk to selectmen all the time that have 70-30, 80-20 on health insurance. They didn't have their selectmen negotiating their union contracts. They had a team that they oversaw, which is what we have now. Every time we have these debates, all it does is hinder our ability to work with the unions. We went through it, was it 2 weeks ago at Selectmen's meeting? We had 100 employees in the room trying to urge us to do something against town meeting, which we voted against because town meeting voted on an article and we put it through. Do I think that that article has a chance at the state? No. The reality is we are governed by certain rules and regulations when it comes to negotiation. You will never see the negotiations open to the public in the paper going back and forth each week. It just won't happen. Police and fire have the ability to go directly to arbitration. We can make them an offer, they can decline and go right to arbitration. The arbitrator looks at all the facts and they give us what we are going to pay them. And if I'm not right here, David, step in, but that's my understanding of it. Now, I've talked to other selectmen in other towns where they have 70-30 and they have 60, some have 65-35. Their taxes are 5 to 10 times what our taxes here. When the arbitrator looks at the overall picture, he looks at wages, cost of living where you are, what your tax rate is, all of these factors. Do you think that we're actually going to be able to get an arbitrator to say we're overpaying our employees? I don't. You know, every time we have these debates, it just hurts our ability to negotiate with unions. 90-10 in my mind is too high. But they've had 90-10 for a long time. And the only way we're going to get that to change is to somehow, we're going to have to work with them. We're probably going to have to pay them. They're just not good. If you were getting paid X amount and you were getting 90-10 insurance and the town just said to you, or your employer said to you, I want to give you 80-20, you'd want something in exchange for it. Now, in the private sector, you can just file bankruptcy and close up your business like the car dealers did, the car manufacturers did, and start a new business the next day. The town can't do that. And you want to change all that? It's not going to happen here in this room. It's not going to happen in this debate. You want to change it, you call your state legislators and your lawmakers, and they change the laws so that all these levels of security and encumbrances come off. But it's not going to happen at the local level. We have finite guidelines that we have to deal with, and that's what we work with, and we do the best that we can. And I got to be quite frank, it's kind of disheartening when we spent a good 6 to 8 months negotiating these contracts and having numerous executive session meetings and going back and forth about them to get beat up like this every time we come to you. So, you know, I'm a little frustrated right now. I'm supposed to be upstairs at a fire station work group meeting, and I can't believe what I'm hearing. You know, and If you want to negotiate the union contracts, what I suggest is you take out papers and run for selectman, and you can have my seat, and you can sit at the table, because then you'll find out how difficult this really is.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Any other comments? I will differ. Thank you for that statement. I think it is always healthy, though, to have these discussions now and then, just to bring it back to where we are. Thank you.
And I will say, the ultimate decision is town meeting.
Absolutely.
They can deny the contract. I remember that contract when you gave a negative recommendation on it, and we got up and gave the farm away. And then I wasn't on the board at the time, but I can imagine the selectmen rolling their eyes, because here they are, they negotiated a level playing field for all the unions, and one union got more than everybody else. So, but
ultimately
we've gone from one extreme of giving them more to now we want to take it all away.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to say, Selectman DaCosta, that if I offended the town manager or the assistant town manager, I apologize. That was not the intention. The intention is, or was, in bringing this forward, and I should also say, this was done by me. This was not done by the Finance Committee. This was done on my own, so I hope you don't think that this was done by the committee as a whole. So if there was any offense taken, I apologize. I'm just bringing these things forward to, I guess, shed light on the situation. I mean, it came up at the board meeting 2 weeks ago with the pension plan. There's a huge amount of unfunded liabilities, and I brought it up 2 years ago at town meeting. First year it didn't pass. This past April it did pass, and it's an issue that has to be dealt with. And what I proposed was a simple choice that new employees get a 401k. And it doesn't change anything that exists now. No employee now is going to have any effect on their pension. It's still going to be fully funded. All it does was give a choice. I didn't think it was that big a deal, but apparently, by the number of town employees that was here, it touched a nerve. So, I think what the chairman said here, it's important to have these discussions, so that's why I bring these things up.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, from the back. Can you come on the microphone and just introduce yourself, please? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Jen Erickson. I am quasi-representative of Labor's Union today. I'd like a show of hands of how many union members of the various union members are in the room.
Okay, let them note that, since we're on TV, you mind if I count, just for the record? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, thank you. 14 members in the audience.
Mr. Sperry brought up the idea that the unions or the employees need a choice. We are mandated as employees of governmental employees of the kind of pension we get. We pay into the pension. The town pays the unfunded liability. They don't match what we pay. If you guys were all in the private sector and you paid into Social Security, your employer was matching what you were paying into Social Security.
Yes, we do.
As government employees, we are provided with the option, if we choose to enroll in a 457K, which is the government employee version of a 401K. We have the option. I enrolled in mine more than 12 years ago, happily. I just want to make that point. I also would like to make the point that a lot of these things are brought to the table, and it really is unnerving and unsettling. And I really believe that it would behoove all of the boards and committees to educate yourselves before you bring something like this to the table. Clearly, this is upsetting a lot of people. You cannot even imagine the amount of emails flying around trying to, whether people are coming and make sure that someone's coming to represent them. It really would have been a show of good faith as employees of the town, and it's a huge service organization on this island, if someone or a group of you could have gotten together to discuss this stuff first and find out what the facts are, instead of coming here, postponing a contract, 2 contracts that were made in good faith with very experienced negotiators after a lot of time. It's kind of demoralizing. So.
Well, thank you for that, and it certainly is not the committee's intention to cause any extra stress or demoralize. this is our forum in open meeting, under open meeting law, to discuss this. And so this is how we are trying to be constructive in this. We are certainly, as my role as chairman, is not trying to throw gasoline into any fire or trying to stir up anything. We are trying to understand, because our obligation is to the taxpayer and at town meetings. So when, like, for example, the contracts that got postponed today, I understand your frustration. I am too. I was a little surprised. But I'd rather that we do the due diligence of giving a recommendation to the selectmen and ultimately to the taxpayer that we are comfortable with, so that the faith that the public has in their bodies is justified. But I'll repeat again, this is our opportunity to discuss this in open session. So we meet as a group to discuss this, and I'm glad you're here to hear this. This is, from one person, is hearing your comments like this does resonate with me. We certainly, and as speaking for the committee, we do not undervalue the role of town employees, and we do appreciate that. But we also have to balance that with our obligation to finances on that. And all the information that we hear from yourself, from views from Mr. Sperry, from Mr. Jenkins, all go, and Mr. DeCosta, who's going now, all go as to help us understand and to come up with our recommendations.
May I comment?
Please, go ahead.
That being said, the whole fact that the Board of Selectmen meeting last week was brought up, and the reason it was brought up, and the town meeting article number 90 that went in, there was a lot of discussion on town meeting floor about, well, what if, and if they, and I'm not sure, you know, and I'm hearing the same thing here, and I do understand that this is your forum for educating everybody. The town meeting floor was not the appropriate place to be discussing that. More information, more research should have been done, and it just, so now everybody's kicking this can down the road. I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, no, we appreciate that. Just on town meeting floor, this committee did take a negative recommendation to Article 90, just for the record.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I took a beating too. Yeah. Chief. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm stepping forward. Just I want to reiterate so that the members of the union here from my department do understand. You know, I've been before this committee a lot of times for a lot of different things, and there never has been a time when I felt that our requests were never duly considered.
Thank you.
If ever there was any doubt, you generally always went in the favor of what we were recommending and what we said was best. So I do appreciate that. But what I do want to comment on is, and I don't want anybody to be insulted by this, and I mean no disrespect, but I've been in government now for 32 years, and I've seen a lot of proposals made and the reaction to a lot of ideas and things, and this one, that I think what the problem is we're not really having a constructive discussion. What we're kind of in a destructive method of presenting these arguments. As an example, I personally think overall, just in Massachusetts here with the pension systems, there certainly is some room for improvement in the pension systems. There's no doubt about that, and it's a discussion that should be had, but it has to be had at the state legislature. When you have it at the local jurisdiction, the problem we run into is some unintended results of that discussion. As a good example of that, the discussion before the Board of Selectmen a week or so ago, in the room were representatives of MassCop, the state organization that represents the police officers. I think there was a representative from the fire union. The state fire union was here, and everything. And they heard everything that was said. What they heard when they walked out the door was, they are starting an attack on the pension system in Massachusetts. So now, statewide, they're already mobilizing to fight this. And what's going to happen, and what has already happened, is word gets out. Monday morning, I think that meeting was Wednesday. No, it was Friday morning, I got a phone call from the police chief in Mashpee. what in the heck's going on in Nantucket, because he's already heard it from the membership. That call I was able to explain was going on. He says, oh, okay. Friday evening, though, the call I got sent shockwaves, or not Friday evening, Monday morning, the call I got sent some shockwaves through my department. Right now, we have 7 vacancies that we have filled, and we have people enrolled in 2 different academies to fill the vacancies. I got 2 phone calls on Monday. One individual specifically wanted out of his contract because when we hire a new employee, we require him to sign a 3-year agreement. You'll stay with us. He wanted out of his contract so he could seek sponsorship from another department, just in case this pension thing passed. Another one called from the other academy. He also was inquiring if he was obligated to stay with us for 3 years because of that agreement. The truth is, none of them are obligated for anything until they actually get appointed as police officers, and I had to tell them that. So right now, today, I don't know if I got 7 people coming out of that academy to help us this summer because of that discussion that was had before the Board of Selectmen. There's a positive way to make these proposals, and one of the positive ways would be to make it more specific. For instance, here in this thing that is in the packet, there's a paragraph about this much information about coin. The Costa Mesa, California coin ordinance is 8 pages long. There's a lot of legalese and language in there. And this is, I'm sure, all of the nice and fluffy stuff about that ordinance, because there probably is some good things in it. But there's no mention about the consequences and what's really happened with those coin ordinances. For instance, the labor disputes, the litigation they've been involved in, the fact that 2 years after the coin ordinance was adopted in Costa Mesa, when they tried to roll it into the town charter, it got soundly defeated by the public because of all the problems. And I'm just saying maybe those are not real problems, but they need to be in there. At town meeting this year, we voted on a 3-line paragraph about pensions. It sent shockwaves through the town employees. Although it seems simple, and if you don't know anything about the pension system, you don't know anything about the process for how somebody gets a pension, it sounds like a good idea. I'll vote for that. Yeah, give them a choice. Sure, who's going to vote against choices and stuff? We all want choices. But the reality is, what we need to see is the language that is going to, and so that we can determine the impact on these proposals on the employees or the affected population. All I'm asking is if this committee or any members of it are going to make proposals for things that are going to affect our employees, remember there are unintended consequences. And I hope we don't suffer that this summer, but those can be mitigated to a big extent by, rather than just make a paragraph proposal or a 3-liner, let's see what the law is, let's see what the meat of what you're proposing is, and then we can have a meaningful discussion so we can come back and talk about what the cost is, and the employees can come back and talk about what the impact is on them, that kind of thing. That's just what I'm asking and I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. It's in consideration. Further comments? Okay. Yes, sir. In the back.
Hi, I'm Dan Furtado, Mascop 330A, Superior's office. There's a union. I've been a police officer for 15 years. I have sat through numerous negotiations. Mr. Jenkins could probably stand up here and state that when we sit here and talk about health insurance, 70-30, 65-35, 90-10, I believe, Mr. Jenkins, did some of those unions give up something when they for the health insurance? Did they get something in return? Last time I checked, it's a quid pro quo, and that's how negotiations work. It's not, hey, here's the farm, in which I took very offense to that, because we stood the line for a health insurance that we know that we need on this island so I can support my family, and therefore maybe we didn't take these stipends, maybe we didn't take additional raises so we could keep this health insurance. So I took very much offense to that. Number two, there is no cloak and daggers, there is no backdoor dealings between us and the town. Our contract's on the town website, it's all right there. We're not hiding anything. So I just want to make that perfectly clear.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Further comment? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Alice Crowley. I am co-president of the Nantucket Teachers Association, and
Thank
my
you.
apologies for being late. I missed part of the presentation. I was negotiating. But I'm here to express I have over 200 members that we represent through the Nantucket Teachers Association, and we just feel that we are constantly being attacked. It has to stop. You know, we're willing to work with you, communicate with you. Just as I believe Chief Pittman referred to, we have our legal people on the other side fighting this, going into Boston. Whatever it takes, we're going to stop it. And we would prefer to be able to communicate and talk with you at a local level than having to go that route. But if that's what it takes, we're willing to do that to protect the benefits that our members currently have.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? Okay. I think that certainly, again, I'll go back looking at the positive side, is I think having this dialogue certainly is healthy from our standpoint to hear the different points of view, and we will certainly continue to welcome any comments that you have as we go along. And again, thank you very much. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the date of the next meeting, and I would like to, you did receive a schedule for going forward, but since that schedule was made, I took another look at it, and again, in the interest of trying to consolidate and our time and make it more efficient, I'm going to cancel at this time Monday, December 1st meeting, and actually our next meeting will be Thursday, December 4th. And at that time, we will hear from Town Council to review the citizen warrant articles that are present and also the Community Preservation Committee report. And then on Monday, December 8th, there'll be a little change in here. That will actually be the public hearing on the citizen warrant articles, so that on December 11th and December 15th, we will have the opportunity to discuss those articles and make motions if we so choose. And then on December 18th, we'll be hearing from the Capital Program Committee. Okay? And you'll get an updated email. You'll be emailed an updated version of this. But any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
What's the time on the 4th that you're going to hold this?
The 4th is 4 o'clock. It was 4:30 today because this was kind of at the last minute.
I think that
yeah.
It may be more personal, but there are
yes.
a couple of fairly large philanthropic events that week that
oh, okay.
people may have. But I think if we're done at
6? So we'll be done? Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Again, what we could do, would it be easier to keep the December 1st meeting and try to move up the Community Preservation Committee?
I'm good on the 4th.
You're okay with that? So you're okay to meet till 6?
Yeah.
Anybody else? Does that sound all right? Meeting on the 6th to the 4th? Fine. Okay. There'll be no meeting December 1st, and it'll be December 4th. Okay?
And everything else is the same as schedule.
Everything else is the same as schedule. Okay? And you'll get an updated pack. So if we're okay with that, then the date of our next meeting is December 4th, 4 o'clock, and it'll be right here.
And Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
Will the contracts come back to us?
Yes, they will. I'll be on the agenda for the 4th. We'll put it on the agenda for the 4th. Yeah, that's the plan. Or if not, they'll be on the agenda at the 11th. If we run it, that'll be you know what we'll do? That'll be the last thing on the agenda, so that if we're running behind, we'll carry over to the 11th, and we'll do that. Okay? Second? Second. All right, everybody have a nice night. Good holiday.
So your brother
I don't need to be left. But you did in public.
Chrissy Coolidge?
But that's
I know Chrissy. It's great.
You let me know ahead of time.
I don't know.
We talked, these contracts have been this way.
I knew
that. You know what? I'll tell you right now. It was what I'm talking about is these are the numbers that are old. If you want to change it, that's fine with me. But don't bring it up at a meeting. It would be nice to go ahead of time where I can go on the staff and got the numbers for you.
What he wants is, he wants this. So you're doing just for this. You went all the way to that.
I appreciate